We're gonna make some beer. Gonna brew on the mash and boil today, and we're doing a 5-gallon batch. We got our grain here. It is going to be a light British style ale. It's called Light Fandango. Basically, it's a real light British ale, so I wanted it to be a lighter shade of pale, so we skipped the Light Fandango. So anyway, right now we are filling our strike water. We're running it through the filter. I like to run real slow through the filter and then into the mash and boil. We got a little bit of water in there already, so I'm going to go ahead and start the turn it on. We're going to get it started heating up since there's a little temperature in the bottom. So our strike temperature that we're looking for is what are we looking for? 163.7. So I'm gonna go set, and then we're gonna move that, actually 163. I'm gonna go 164, but once it gets recirculating, that'll work. And then I'm gonna set the button there, and then this is the offset time. I'm gonna set that to 0, so that way it'll start heating right away. One of the cool things about the mash and boil is that you could set that. I could fill the water up overnight, or I could fill the water up last night and let it start heating up, and set the offset for 8 hours, and it will start heating up in the morning, be all ready to go when I'm ready to go. So, all right, we're gonna let that heat up. Once we have, I'm gonna go about 4.5 gallons or so, maybe 4 gallons of strike water. Then I'm gonna run some more water into my other kettle that I have here. That I'm going to heat up upstairs on the stove, so I can use that for my sparge water later on. Once we pull our grain basket up here, I'm going to need some other water heated up to about 170 degrees. And I want to have that water filtered too, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that water right now off of the same while I'm running through the charcoal filter. And just in case, I'm going to fill another bucket after that with some more water as well, just because it seems like I always end up needing a little bit more water than I was expecting. So that's kind of where we're at now. We'll check back in once we have the strike water heated up and we're ready to mash in. Okay, we are back. Our strike water is up to 160 degrees right now. We were at 164. It's cooled just a little bit, but we are ready to mash in. So what I'm going to do is drop this. I'm going to come back and I'm going to go to the set button. And I want to mash. Our mash temp is actually 152. I'm going to set this a couple degrees higher than that because it won't actually turn on until it's down around 150 or even 148 before it starts heating up. So 152, because there's a little bit of variance in the thing. So then I'm going to push the set button again. And then the timer, we want to leave it at 0 because I don't want any offset. And I didn't push it soon enough. And I got my handy dandy mash paddle here. Just pouring the grains in slowly, and I'm stirring as I'm going. Just keep going. Want to make sure all the grains are completely wetted. We don't have any clumps. At this point it's kind of easy because there's lots of water in there. Every now and then I kind of just want to pick up from the bottom and stir, but basically just stirring as I'm adding them slowly. So I'll keep doing this until all the grains are in there and they're all wetted, and then we'll come back and talk about how to recirculate, because this mash and boil has a pump in it so it can recirculate the mash, which is a pretty cool feature, and is really helpful as far as maintaining the mash temp that we're looking for, staying close to it. In the long run, I think we'll be real happy. So it's going to be plenty close enough. So, all right, we'll check back when I do that. All right, so all the grains are mashed in now, and I'm just stirring to make sure that everything is wetted. I kind of like to pull from the bottom and pull up to the top when I'm doing this, just to see any areas down at the bottom of it that might not be wetted. Also, then I'm not pushing down on stuff down through the false bottom that might have extra particulate going down there. So just lifting things up from the bottom, trying to make sure that we're real clear there. And I think we're looking real good. So the next step then is going to be to get the recirculation arm coming through. So pull this out. I've got the recirc arm connected up to it right here. I also have a little diffuser you can see on the end of this. That didn't come with it, I added it to it, but that keeps the water that's recirculating through, keeps it from just going straight down on the mash bed, on the top of the grain bed. I'm going to turn the pump on, and then I've got an adjustment for how fast I want it to come out here. If I open this up, you can see it's coming out pretty fast through. I'm going to just turn it down a little bit so it can run gentle. I'm going to adjust the temp on that, or the speed on that, to try to maintain that temperature. We don't want the water to get down below the level of the pump, because then it'll start running dry, bad for the pump, not helping anything. But basically, the burner at the bottom of this is going to heat up that big circle of water, and we're actually exactly at 152 right now. But it's going to cool a little bit, because as water drains down through the mash bed, when it gets down to around 148, that's going to kick on, it's going to heat up, and actually I'm going to set the temp a little bit higher now. I'm going to set it up to 154. That way 152 is just kind of in the center of the spot that we want to look for. So it'll start to heat down to 150 or 148 or so, heat back up to 154, and as it's continually recirculating, 152 is going to be about the average temperature that's inside there. So I'm going to let this run the whole time. I'm just going to get this at a good speed where it's about coming out of the top about the speed that it's draining through the bottom, and we just have a good constant recirculation going through there and keep maintaining the temp. This also helps to make it real clear. Sometimes particulate that comes down through here or parts of the grain are going to get pumped back over the top, get held up in the mash, and it makes what we have in the boil significantly clearer as well. So 60-minute mash, so I'm going to set my timer up here for 60 minutes. Start. We are mashing. I'm going to let it just go like that. Now if I had the model of this that did not have the pump, then I would probably put a lid on this. We wouldn't have the heat on, because in that case we don't have a way of recirculating that. We want to just try to maintain that temperature as fast as we can. So I might even wrap it with a blanket or something. But since I have the one with the pump, I'm going to heat the bottom of it and keep recirculating like that. So we'll check back when we're at the end of the mash. At this point, I'm going to go upstairs on the stove and heat up sparge water to about 170 degrees. And then at the end of this, we'll pull the basket up, and then we'll pour the sparge water over the top of that in order just to rinse the rest of the sugars out of that grain, and we'll see how all that works when it comes up. All right. We have been through our 60 minutes on our mash now, so I am going to turn off the pump and let that drain for just a second there, and then I'm going to move this out of the way, and we're going to lift. So I'm going to lift it up. It's a little bit hard getting this at first because it's all full of water, but as it drains out, it gets lighter. You get it up, and I'm going to turn it then so that the legs are actually resting on the stops here, and you can hear the work draining out of there. And so at this point here, I'm going to turn the temperature up and get it started heating up to a boil. So I'm going to turn the temperature up to 218 degrees. Even though it boils at 214, we don't want it to get to 214 or 212 and shut off and keep turning on and off. At 218, it'll maintain a good rolling boil that keeps the heating element from turning on and off. So set, and then I'm going to raise the temperature up. All right, so we're set to 218 degrees, so that way the heating element can start heating this up. Hopefully by about when we're finished sparging, this will be up getting close to boil temperature, because it takes a little while for all this liquid to drain down through. So you may remember earlier we heated up some sparge water upstairs. I poured an extra 3 gallons while our mash was going on. I heated this on the stove. I'm going to check the temperature on this because I got it a little bit hot. Good, 164. Basically 170 is kind of a good target temperature. I don't want it to be too hot because then it can pull the astringency out of the grains. It doesn't really matter that much. At 168, 170 is where it denatures the enzymes, but we're not too worried about that because we're not a commercial brewery or something like that where we're trying to recreate the same beer every time. So mainly I just want it to be warm enough that it can really easily rinse the sugars out of the grains. And I'm just basically going to pour this over the top here. Kind of move it around. I'm going to put in a fair amount in the beginning here the first couple times, so that way we've got kind of a layer, a couple inches of water up above the grain bed. And that way it could just work its way down through the grain bed and rinse those sugars out. Now, we could diffuse this water as I'm pouring it on. It's probably chewing up the grain bed a little bit on the top, but I'm moving it around evenly. It's not going to dig channels in it, so honestly I'm not too worried about that at this point. But you could pour over the top of a spoon or a colander or something like that. That's going to kind of spread this out so that it's not hitting on top of the grain bed. But I've kind of found when I've done this in the past that I get a pretty good gravity, pretty good rinsing of the sugars, and it seems like it's working pretty efficiently. So I'm going to keep going till this water is all in. And actually what I'll be doing after this, I am basically going to keep doing this, keep rinsing until we reach a pre-boil volume of 6.5 gallons. We're doing a 60-minute boil on this. The measurement is in the back here. So I'm going to check. We're down about, where are we at? About 4.5 gallons right now. So we're going to run about 2 more gallons through this and let 2 more gallons drain in, and just kind of keep an eye on that. Once we get to the 6.5 gallon point, then I'll just pull this off to the side and try to get it to where there's not a whole lot of water left in there, to where most of the water is run through and it's all down in what is essentially our boil kettle now at this point. So we'll keep doing that, and once we get close to boiling, then we'll come back and revisit it. So we have been draining. We're about 6.5 gallons, maybe just a hair over there. Not much draining out of here anymore. So we're going to pull the grain, set it aside. I've got another bucket here that actually fits in kind of nicely, which is kind of handy to have because it will still drain just a little bit more. We're going to pull this, set it aside right there, let it cool a little more, and then I'll move it into the yard waste container. Or if you have a mulch, that's a great place for it as well. So now we're going to give this a little time to come up to a boil. Right now we're at 174, so I still got a little ways to go. Now is when I like to weigh out all of my additions, my hop additions, anything else that's going to go in the boil, and have those ready. So in case I get distracted, I don't forget about that. We're not going to set our timer yet. We're going to wait till it actually gets up to a decent rolling boil before we set our timer for 60 minutes. But weighing out my hops, I've already got my 60-minute addition weighed out there. I also have my it's Whirlflock, half a Whirlflock tablet and yeast nutrients that is going to go in around 15 or 20 minutes. And then my 5-minute addition, what did we say here? 5 minutes is going to be a ½ ounce of Kent Golding, so I'm going to get those weighed just so that way I've got them all ready and ready to go. I don't have to be scrambling at the last minute. So we'll do that, set them aside, and then I'm also going to rehydrate yeast. I'm using Nottingham dry yeast today, which you can just put in dry and all by itself, but I kind of like to rehydrate it so that it's essentially a liquid yeast before it's going in there. So we'll talk a little bit about how to do that once we get a little bit farther into the boil, because that doesn't take too much time. So, and then basically we'll be putting it aside and we'll be done. We'll be making beer. All right, so we are coming to a boil here. So what that means is we're going to do our 60-minute hop addition, which is right here. I'm going to sprinkle those in the top, because I don't really need to stir anything right now. Put that in there and get the timer set now. It was well in a couple minutes before I started that, but what we're actually timing is how long the hops are in there. So that's our 60-minute addition, so we get the full bittering out of those hops that we wanted. So we're starting the boil. About 15 or 20 minutes left. I have my yeast nutrient and my whirl flock, so for clarity. And then right at the last 5 minutes of the boil, we've got our last hop addition for our aroma hop addition. And then we are going to be rehydrating the yeast. I got some water that I boiled, and it's cooling off right now. Probably about half hour left in the boil. I'll get this started because it wants about 45 minutes to rehydrate. So we'll give that a little bit more time before I get that rolling. But it's going to take the last half hour of the boil, probably 15 minutes to chill or so. And then that yeast ought to be all ready to pitch. So next step right now, while this is boiling, is I'm going to figure out what fermenter we're using, start getting the fermenter sanitized and ready to go. So that way, once we're cooled off, I'm also going to sanitize my immersion chiller and get our hoses hooked up for that. So that way, once we get to the end of the boil, we'll be all set to move to the next step. All right, going to rehydrate our yeast. Still got a little while left in the boil, but that way this has plenty of time to absorb some water and just make it so it's not dry anymore. So I got some water here that I boiled earlier to sanitize it. I've cooled it back down. I like to just cool it to room temperature. We don't want it too warm so that it doesn't hurt the yeast, although a lot of yeast packets say to go to 80 or 90 degrees. What does this one says? Well, it says 30 to 35 Celsius. So 70 to 80 degrees, and basically room temperature. All I'm going to do right now is just sprinkle it on the top. I'm not going to worry about stirring or anything. Sprinkle it and just let it absorb on its own. Just like that. Just going to cover it back up so that it's protected. And we're just going to let it sit for a little while. So probably about a half hour it's going to sit there. I'm going to give it a little swirl. I've got a spoon I'll sanitize, and then just stir it gently to kind of work it in, then give it about another 10 minutes. And at the end of that it'll be all ready to pitch. So you're just about getting close towards the end of the boil, so we'll pick it back up there. All right, we are done boiling. I've got my immersion chiller over here. I've had it in the sanitizer bucket. Other ways you could sanitize it, you could just put it in the boil kettle for the last 15 minutes, but I just like to use the sanitizer because it's easier. And I've got it out here. I've already got the cold water running through it. Just going to put that right down inside there. And it won't take it very long. Groundwater is pretty cold, so ballpark we want to try to get down to about 70 degrees. Then I'll do a little whirlpool. We'll get it into our fermenter, and we'll be looking good. That's all there is to it so far. I think we are just about ready to go. I'm going to check our temperature, make sure that we are down, just sanitizing the thermometer a little bit. Make sure that we are down 70 degrees or under. And yeah, we're in real good shape. So we are at 65.6, which is fine. I'd rather be a little bit under than a little bit over, so I'd rather have it come up to temp. So we're going to pull the immersion chiller out, and then I'm going to give it a little whirlpool. I like to do a manual whirlpool. Now I'll clean that up in a little bit. I like to do a manual whirlpool here. and then just let it settle for a little bit. What this does is it makes everything cone up in the center of the bottom of the kettle away from the ball valve. We're still going to get some sediment out of here that's going to go in the fermenter, and that's fine. It's not the end of the world. I don't care. But if I can get this spinning real fast, and then I'm just going to let it settle. I'll give it about 10 minutes on the timer here, and then cover it up so nothing falls in there while it's cold like that. Like I said, it's going to cause everything to cone up in the center of the base, so that when we run off into our fermenter, a lot of the sediment and hot matter is going to stay centered in the middle as a cone, and allow us to run much cleaner off into the fermenter. About 10 minutes, that's going to allow everything to settle at the bottom also, so we'll have mostly just clear wort at the top, and we'll be looking real good. Just about there. And it's looking nice and clear on the top, so everything is settled down. So we're ready to run off into our fermenting bucket. Fermenting bucket is already sanitized and real ready to go there. So I'm going to just go ahead and open this up. I've got a little spigot that I made, a little hose that plug onto there to just so that it doesn't splash around, and get it closer down into the bucket. And I'm going to actually add some oxygen into the bucket, or into the wort, before I add my yeast. So just to kind of help make sure that it's going to have plenty of oxygen in it for the yeast action. Although if we're letting it splash, a fair amount of oxygen is getting involved in it this way as well. But always want to be thinking about our yeast health and doing the best that we can as far as that goes. So keep this guy covered up so that nothing gets in there. While it's running off there, also I'm actually gonna stop it for just a second and get a gravity reading. Just set that aside, let it settle down for a minute so we know. That way there's no foam on the top, a nice color there. We're up to 5 1/4 gallons, maybe just a little over, but that's okay. So I'm going to do my oxygen. It's been in the sanitizing bucket here. Just try to get as much sanitizer off as I can. I don't want to touch the stone. Don't really want to wipe this down. I like to get it started before I put it in. There we go. So that way it's pushing out the whole time. I'm gonna go 1 minute of oxygenating. I like to just do this so that there's enough that I see bubbles. I'm not trying to blow the wort out of the bucket or anything like that, but just enough that I see bubbles. Turn it a little bit so it gets into all the nooks and crannies. Want to just make sure there's plenty of oxygen in there. We already have some yeast nutrient, but an awful lot of brewing. Second to cleaning, the second most important thing is taking care of your yeast. Yeast health, yeast nutrient, everything you can do for that yeast to be happy. We are just about down there. We got a good kind of foam layer on top now. You can see all that oxygen that's coming out. So it's in there in solution. Have some good, happy, healthy yeast. All right, shut that off. Shut that off. So we got our oxygen in there, got our yeast. I'm gonna give this a little swirl just to make sure that it's all up in there in suspension. Dump that straight in there. Looking good there. Got my lid here that was already sanitized. I'll get that snapped on a little better, get the airlock in there, and then we'll set that aside. Let's take a look at our gravity while we're at it here. Just give that a little spin, and looks to me like 1.044. I don't know if you can see it from that side. It'll always face the wrong way. There we go, 1.044. And if I remember right, our recipe target was 1.043. So
woo woo!
I'll take it. And that's pretty much it. The next part is just cleaning, but I'm not gonna make you sit through that. So thanks for hanging out on a brew day, and that's how you use the